June 22nd, 1941. Soviet border. What happened when a leader overestimated his power and underestimated his enemy? What happened when he believed no nation could stand in his way? But in the end, the leader who thought he was unstoppable was defeated and forced to end his life. That man was Adolf Hitler, and his mistakes would cause the largest and deadliest battle in history. Operation Barbarossa. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. It became the biggest military attack ever recorded. More than 3 million German soldiers, along with tanks, artillery guns, and aircraft, crossed the border expecting victory. The Soviet Union was not prepared. Joseph Stalin, the leader at that time, ignored repeated warnings about Germany's invasion, so they were caught off guard. When the invasion began, the military force of the Soviet Union, the Red Army, lost hundreds of thousands of army troops in just a few weeks. Hitler believed they would win fast, because at the start, that was exactly what was happening. Cities were destroyed, and soldiers were captured. The Germans thought they were days away from the final battle. But the invasion that Hitler believed would be a quick victory turned out to be a long and deadly battle, which the Germans were unprepared for. And soon, Operation Barbarossa would destroy Hitler's confidence and change the course of World War II. May 1941. Before Operation Barbarossa began, Germany had taken control of most of Europe. It seemed as if Adolf Hitler could not be stopped. But behind Germany's victories was a plan that Hitler had wanted to do for years: the invasion of the Soviet Union. He hated the Soviet Union. He hated communism. He felt threatened by its massive population. Even though Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact in 1939, Hitler never planned to honor it and quietly prepared an invasion. Germany had defeated Poland, France, and the Balkans in just a few weeks. So Hitler expected the same result for the Soviet Union. But his generals warned him that the country was too big and too cold. Invading it would be extremely difficult. But Hitler refused to listen. On the other side, Joseph Stalin received warnings about a possible invasion. Just like Hitler ignored his generals, Stalin ignored these warnings. Because of this, the Soviet Union was not ready for what was coming. Millions of German soldiers were ready to invade their land. When Operation Barbarossa began, the Germans moved fast. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, they crossed the Soviet border. They bombed Soviet airfields, and nearly 1,800 aircraft were destroyed. Because the attacks were unexpected, many pilots never reached their planes before they were destroyed. This invasion was divided into 3 major groups. Army Group North moved toward the Baltic states and Leningrad. Germany wanted the area because it controlled the sea routes and could block Soviet access to the Baltic Sea. Army Group Center was the strongest group. It moved through Belarus towards Smolensk and then Moscow. Moscow was the Soviet capital, the center of government, communication, and rail networks. Many German generals believed that if Moscow fell, the Soviet Union would collapse. It was the fastest way to force Stalin to surrender. Army Group South moved into Ukraine. Hitler wanted Ukraine because it was the Soviet Union's main source of grain, farmland, and manpower. The plan also included seizing the oil fields of the Caucasus. Controlling these regions would strike directly at the heart of the Soviet economy. More than 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, and aircraft were prepared to invade the Soviet Union. It became the largest military operation in history. The Soviet Union was overwhelmed. Because the attack came without warning, panic spread everywhere. Commanders didn't know which orders to follow. Many army units received no instructions at all. Border guards had been told not to engage the Germans, so they didn't fire until it was already too late. Communication lines were quickly destroyed. Radio stations went silent. Units no longer knew where the enemy was or where they were supposed to move. Within a single week, the German army had advanced more than 200 miles into Soviet territory. In the north, cities fell rapidly. In the center, German panzers pushed straight through Belarus. In the south, massive Soviet formations were annihilated. To the Germans, it looked like total success. They believed the enemy would surrender soon. One of the Soviet Union's most devastating defeats occurred near Minsk, one of the first major objectives of the German invasion. Two large German panzer groups encircled hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. Within days, more than 300,000 Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner. German confidence grew rapidly. So many soldiers were surrendering that they believed victory was close. July 1941. The German advance continued. Panzers were already near Smolensk, a critical gateway to Moscow. Another 300,000 Soviet soldiers were captured. German commanders believed they could reach Moscow within weeks. But not everything went according to plan. Joseph Stalin finally recovered from the shock of the invasion. After days of silence and confusion, he addressed the Soviet people on July 3rd, calling on them to defend their land. Despite losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the Soviet Union was still able to mobilize millions more. Although many units were destroyed, others fought with determination to defend their land. Some refused to surrender, even when completely surrounded. Many Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner, but German officers began to notice something unsettling. They realized the Soviets had far more soldiers than they had expected. August 1941. Adolf Hitler made a critical mistake. Instead of pushing toward Moscow, he ordered the panzer units to turn south toward Kiev. His generals strongly disagreed. They warned him that Moscow was the primary objective and that any delay would give the Soviets time to prepare. Again, Hitler didn't listen. He wanted to seize Ukraine first. This decision led to another victory. More than 500,000 Soviet soldiers were surrounded and captured. It became one of the largest military defeats in history. Germany celebrated the victory. They believed it was a certain win. But they also realized that the delay in attacking Moscow would force them to face the autumn rains and the brutal Soviet winter. Hitler chose not to attack directly. He decided to starve the city into surrender. Food shipments were cut off. Thousands of civilians died from hunger. This was exactly what the German leadership intended. October 1941. Army Group Center prepared its attack on Moscow. The operation was called Operation Typhoon. Once again, German forces encircled large formations of Soviet troops, also known as the Red Army. But this time, the weather slowed the operation far more than expected. Heavy rains turned roads into deep mud. Panzers became stuck. Military trucks could no longer move. The entire advance slowed to a crawl. By late October, winter arrived. German troops had no winter uniforms. Weapons jammed. Vehicle engines froze. Frostbite became widespread. Despite the conditions, Hitler ordered his troops to keep marching toward Moscow. December 1941. The Germans reached the outskirts of Moscow. This time, the Red Army had prepared a strong defense. Joseph Stalin transferred well-trained Siberian troops, hardened by extreme cold, to defend the capital. They wore white winter uniforms to blend into the snow. The Red Army, supported by Soviet tanks, pushed back exhausted German forces. For the first time, the Germans were forced to retreat. But Hitler refused to accept defeat. He personally took control of the German military and ordered every unit to hold its position no matter the cost. As the fighting continued, temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. German soldiers struggled to survive while the Red Army kept pushing them back. Winter had become a weapon for the Soviet Union. The Germans failed to capture Moscow, but the war in the East was far from over. Hitler soon planned a new offensive, this time aimed at the oil fields of the Caucasus. This led to the Battle of Stalingrad, one of the deadliest battles of the war. The Red Army destroyed an entire German army. More than 300,000 German and Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. July 5, 1943. Germany attempted one last major attack at Kursk, which became the largest tank battle in history. But this time, the Red Army was stronger and prepared. The Soviet Union stopped the German attack and began pushing west. Germany could no longer win against the Red Army. German forces thought that Operation Barbarossa would be the same as their previous invasion. But a miscalculation from Hitler and German officers caused many problems. They thought that as they captured large numbers of Red Army soldiers, the Soviet leaders would panic. They were unaware of the Soviet reserve system. Behind every defeated Soviet division, another formation appeared. It seemed as if Soviet manpower was unlimited. Another problem lay inside Germany's own command structure. The conflict between Adolf Hitler and his generals weakened the German forces. They constantly opposed each other's decisions. The generals wanted to focus their strength in one direction. They believed that capturing Moscow first would break Soviet control. But Hitler preferred to capture not only Moscow, but as many cities as possible. These internal conflicts caused serious problems. German divisions advanced rapidly, leaving their supply lines behind. Panzers reached new cities quickly, while infantry units lagged miles behind. Supply trucks moved too slowly. What was planned as a fast victory became a deadly struggle for the German army. German tanks and vehicles were designed for Western Europe. They performed well on solid roads. Soviet roads were different. After heavy rain, they turned into deep mud. Tanks and trucks became stuck, delaying entire German units for days. When winter arrived, German equipment began to fail. The German army had not brought winter uniforms. Soldiers used torn blankets and newspapers stuffed inside their coats. What the Germans expected was very different from the reality they faced in the Soviet Union. German forces also faced fuel shortages. Panzers consumed too much fuel. Germany did not have enough trucks. German divisions received fuel days late. Others ran out completely. Replacements became another issue. Unlike the Soviet Union, Germany had limited reserve soldiers. New replacements arrived late, and Hitler still demanded they attack. This prevented the army from resting or reorganizing. It pushed German soldiers to their limits. German soldiers expected a quick operation. They believed they would be home before winter. This made them question orders from higher command. Others began to fear the war would not end soon. The problems inside the German system became as dangerous as the battles against the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa reached its end when the German forces could no longer fight against the Soviet army. After they failed to invade Moscow, the number of their armies declined. Not even an order from Hitler could restore their divisions. What started as a confident invasion ended as a struggle for survival. November 1942. The Soviet Union launched a major counterattack. They struck weaker units guarding the German flanks. The Red Army surrounded the entire German Sixth Army. It was one of the worst situations the German military had ever faced. Hitler ordered them to hold their position. He told them that they would be supplied by air to help them attack the Red Army. But it failed. Bad weather stopped it, and Soviet fighters shot down some of their aircraft. German forces could not break through the Soviet positions because of the lack of supplies. The winter made movement and rescue slow and dangerous. The German troops ran out of food and fuel. The soldiers contracted diseases, and they starved. Soldiers had no choice but to burn their things and books to stay warm. January 1943. German commander Friedrich Paulus surrendered. The last remaining troops in the northern part of the city surrendered 2 days later. More than 90,000 German and Allied soldiers were taken prisoner. Only around 5,000 returned home. The failure at Kursk marked the final major offensive of the German forces. After this defeat, Germany never launched another large-scale attack. The Red Army gained the initiative. By the end of 1943, Germany was no longer fighting to defeat the Red Army. They were fighting simply to slow them down. By early 1944, the German army was not the same army that crossed the Soviet border in 1941. Most of their experienced officers were either dead or captured by the Red Army. Supplies that once arrived daily no longer came only once a week, sometimes once a month. The fuel shortage made the soldiers abandon the tanks. The Red Army took the same cities that the Germans had once captured. Smolensk, Kharkov, and Kiev all returned to Soviet control. The Germans tried to build a new defensive line, but it didn't last as the Soviet attacks were too strong. Unlike the Red Army, which was well trained, many German soldiers were inexperienced or poorly trained. They were no match for the Red Army's ability to fight in extreme cold. By mid-1944, the Soviet Union launched Operation Barbarossa, one of the most destructive offensives of the war. In just a few weeks, Germany lost more than 20 divisions in Belarus. It was one of the biggest German defeats of World War II. German forces were forced to retreat all the way to Poland. This proved that Germany could no longer stop the Red Army. Commanders asked Hitler for permission to withdraw and save their troops, but he refused. He continued to demand that German soldiers fight the powerful Soviet army, even though it caused far more losses than gains. In 1945, the Soviet Union launched its final attack on Berlin. German soldiers knew they had already lost the fight, but Hitler continued to give orders. They had almost no aircraft left, and the Navy could no longer support the front lines. Berlin was surrounded by the Red Army in April 1945. April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler took his own life in his underground bunker. 2 days later, Berlin surrendered. By May 1945, the last German forces surrendered. Operation Barbarossa, which was supposed to destroy the Soviet Union, had destroyed Germany's pride and Adolf Hitler's confidence that the Nazi Germans were unstoppable. May 2nd, 1945. The fall of Berlin marked the destruction of Nazi Germany. The war they thought would bring another victory to their land ended as a long, exhausting fight to survive. Not only the German soldiers, but also millions of civilians were affected. They fled their homes and lost everything because of the war. Cities were destroyed, and Germany's economy collapsed. Food and water were limited. The German soldiers who were able to survive watched as the country they were fighting for collapsed to the ground. They officially signed their unconditional surrender. That marked the end of the war in Europe. Operation Barbarossa had failed. It cost Germany millions of soldiers and military power and helped turn the Soviet Union into one of the world's strongest nations. Many of the German soldiers became prisoners of war. Some never returned home. The invasion that Hitler believed would be a victory brought destruction to Germany. Instead, it led to the deadliest fight in World War II. The Soviet Union also lost millions of lives during the war, but it recovered and defeated Germany. This was because it fought with a strategy that valued its manpower. Attacks were no longer launched without purpose. After the disaster of 1941, the Soviet Union recovered. Joseph Stalin learned his lesson and began listening to his commanders, something Adolf Hitler failed to do. This showed that leadership was not only about giving orders, but also about listening to those you led. Millions of lives were lost during Operation Barbarossa, lives taken by the cruel reality of war. Germany may have lost to the Soviet Union, but in the end, no one truly won the war. Millions of lives were lost on both sides. Cities were left in ruins, taking years to rebuild. The story of Operation Barbarossa is a reminder that one single mistake could destroy an entire army. A reminder of the real cost of war. Both nations paid a price that lasted for decades. It showed that even the strongest army could fail when it overestimated its power and underestimated the determination of its enemy to defend their land. The Nazi German army once seemed unstoppable, but when it entered a land of people united by survival, it faced an enemy no weapon could destroy.